Welcome to this week's edition of the Friday Field Report South America. I'm Aaron Edwards with Santos Springs. We're going to be talking about the CONAB reports that came out this week, comparing them to the USDA numbers. We're going to be talking about the exchange rate and the implications down there to Brazilian farmers and what that's doing to their profitability. But first, there's the old adage, rain makes grain. I'm not even going to pull up a weather forecast. I'll let you know that there's plenty of rain. But it's not all good news. So I want to show some pictures that have been circulating down there in farmer groups of just a little bit of what's going on, because picture paints 1,000 words. So the first one we're going to start with, let me go ahead and pull up the screen. First one we're going to start with is just an animation that gained a little bit of traction, and it's Noah's Ark 2026 in the middle of a soybean field. But now I'm going to show some pictures actually showing their soybean crop down there, and you can just see what's going on with the crop. They can't get in the field, they can't harvest. It is just a chaotic mess. And then you get that much moisture, then you get the hot sun come out, the pods pop open. Yeah, there we go. And keep them going. There we go. Really sad situation. Man, germinating in the pod. It's a mess. It's a mess. I think got a couple more. There we go. That's what it looks like. It's just a tough situation. Good looking beans, but doesn't do much good if you can't harvest them. Definitely some quality issues. All right, now let's transition. This is the CONAB report. Now let's actually look at some numbers. What are the implications of that? So yeah, there's jaw-dropping pictures of soybeans being lost in the field. Does this actually mean lower production numbers? So let's just take a look. Let me actually grab a highlighter here. Let's do this in green. The first thing is we'll just talk about the soybean harvest. And this is weekly data, similar to the US, where we have updates every Monday. There's updates on how the field work's going along. So 17.4% harvested on soybeans. That's 1.3% behind pace. So actually, yeah, we could look at pictures. If you just read the reports, though, harvest is almost on pace. It's not much of a story yet. And then you shift gears, we'll shift colors as well, go to yellow. Well, and you look at the soybean production numbers. So CONAB, their report came out on Thursday. They have the Brazilian soybean crop pegged at 178 million metric tons. That's up 6.5 million metric tons year over year. And it's up 0.6, half a million metric tons month over month. It is 2 million metric tons below the USDA. So if you remember on Monday's report, the USDA increased the Brazilian crop by 2 million metric tons. CONAB increased it 500,000 metric tons, but it's still behind it. So basically what we saw was they had estimates that were pretty similar. CONAB increased it 500,000 metric tons. The USDA increased it 2 million metric tons. So the USDA estimate is larger than the Brazil estimate. If you would plug the CONAB number of 178 into the USDA balance sheet, everything else the same, we would have actually seen global soybean stocks go down 1 million metric tons, about. Right? So the reason that the ending stocks globally went up was because the USDA bumped up the size of the South American crop. I also had some questions about, okay, there's pictures about quality. Is this actually a yield story? And it's very hard to translate excessive rain into yield reduction, because there's quality issues that show up, but how much of that gets blended in, how much of that ends up going to, some type of feed, how much of it ends up finding a home. And even if there is yield loss, a lot of times that's a story that rolls out slowly. So it's not something that we'll see if there's dryness and then it's dry, and those stories, they can, you've lost yield. If it's hard to get it out of the field, there's some quality issues, those are slow playing stories. Even on the farm, you're like, well, that field's gone, but maybe we'll harvest it, maybe we'll get something off of it, maybe we can blend it, I don't know, with moisture. And I would just, on moisture, I saw a bunch of those pictures and comments. There's reports of harvesting soybeans at 30% moisture. So it's a mess. It's a mess. Those are numbers that are just beyond any realm of normal or acceptable, best practices on farming. It's just, what do? You have monsoon rains and soybeans are rotting. Well, do you pick them, or do you try to, harvest them super moist? Or what do you do? It's just a tough situation. So shifting gears to corn, the corn, CONAB has the corn crop pegged in Brazil at 138.4 million metric tons. And that's down 2.8 million metric tons year over year. It's down almost 500,000 metric tons month over month. But, and this is a big one, and I'll do this one in red, it is 7.5 million metric tons above the USDA. So the USDA's estimate for Brazilian corn is still well below Brazil's estimate. If the CONAB number on corn is true, and if that comes to fruition, that is a big number. That is a big, big number. And you say, okay, well, that's Brazil corn. I don't care. We need to know about U.S. corn. The thing is, Brazil does have domestic demand for corn, but they export very cheaply, basically overrun bushels. So it's a lot smaller corn crop, but whatever they don't use domestically, they basically kind of dump, just the forces of market, just kind of dump that corn on the export market, usually at cheap prices. Now, that caveat about cheap prices, we're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about the exchange rate, because there's an interesting story there and a potentially bullish story. But if there are that extra 7.5 million metric tons, if that number is true, that's almost a for sure export, and that's almost a for sure export that's going to come out of U.S. exports, probably. I mean, just based on what we've seen in the past and what we currently see. So if they have extra corn, that'll go to the global market. And if that extra corn goes to the global market, it probably comes directly out of U.S. exports. And that is a big number. That it's not a trivial matter, right? Those are big volumes. It's not rounding errors or anything. That brings us to our last point, and I'll switch this to blue. Even just talking to customers down there, well, let's look at the number, then I'll talk about it. Safrinha corn planting, so this is the double crop corn that comes after soybeans. Well, if you can't pick your soybeans because it's too wet, how are you going to plant your corn? And even if you can get your beans off, I mean, can you picture planting? It's just way too wet to be planting. So they're 21.6% planted on Safrinha corn. That is 4% behind pace. It varies from north to south, but most of the double crop corn really should be planted by the end of February. That's when most of the double crop corn should be planted by. And sure, we have a little bit of time till the end of February, and then the exact cutoffs of when you're out of the window vary. In some regions, hey, first week of March, don't even plant anymore. Oh, second week of March, don't even plant anymore. So it varies region by region, but we aren't far, a few short weeks away from kind of that window shutting off. I've mentioned this before, so for some of you this will be repetition, but how does the double crop work? Well, you plant when there's barely enough moisture. You have to harvest in the middle of the growing season, in the middle of the raining season. You harvest the soybeans, and then you plant the corn, and you basically have to have enough time left in the rainy season to get you through pollination on the corn. And if you can get through pollination on the corn, then okay, good. But they know roughly region by region when approximately the rainy season shuts off, give or take a couple of weeks, right? But you know, seasonally, rain records. So in your region, where does it usually shut off? And it varies, but you could get a late rain that can be a lifesaver. But there comes a point, just like in the US, where it's not so much sunlight or it's rain, but it's just too risky to plant double crop corn, because you almost know that unless you get a really lucky late season rain, it's not going to get you through pollination. And even if you plant on time, it could turn dry a little bit earlier and you could still miss that pollination. And at real low yields, it just doesn't work that well. So this could become a bullish story on corn. And the reason it's looking like it probably will be a bullish story on corn. Sure, they can plant fast, but if you just look at the forecast, it's really wet this week. It's already really wet. If the sun would come out, it would take a few days to dry up. So it's very wet, and there is a tremendous amount of rain forecasted for the upcoming week. So, okay, not much progress is being made on planting. It's slow. It's 4% behind pace, which isn't bad. But if you'd say, okay, by the first week of February, we want a quarter of the field done, and then by the second week, we want to be halfway done, or, I'm rounding, but by the third, 75, and by the end, we're 100% done. And a lot of farmers, that would be perfect for them. Well, if you're 21% and it's coming up on the middle of the month, you feel very far behind. So if it was sunny and you could plant 30% of the crop next week, 40% of the crop, great, that's fine. They do have a lot of firepower on planting. Not every soybean acre goes to corn. So yeah, they can get a lot of corn in fast. But if we're looking at the 20th of February, and who knows how much they'll plant this week? Will they plant 10%? Who knows, right? How much can you get planted with rainy weather? If you're at 25, 26, 30%, and it's the 20th of February, it's going to be hard to not picture some type of reduction in double crop corn acres. And if that's not next week, 2 weeks from now, we're not far from there being a story that, yeah, probably those expectations on corn acreage aren't going to happen, or they are planted, but we know that X amount, 20, 30, 40% of the crop is planted outside of the optimal window. So we can already start thinking about some degree of yield loss on that. So anyhow, it's just a story to keep your eye on. The potentially most bullish story out of South America is delayed corn due to excessive rainfall. And I've talked, it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I talked about the exchange rate, but part of what we do here on the Friday Field Report is just let you know what the view is of farmers in Brazil, boots on the ground. What are they dealing with? And this is the chart that is hurting them more than any other chart. This is what, as bad as the field looks like, this is what a lot of farmers are looking at, is the dollar. So I just want to put their exchange rate, all right? I just want to put this in a perspective. This is the lowest price. I think you'd have to go back to 2022, maybe it's 2024, but you'd have to go back a long time before the exchange rate was this low. Just so that you could picture this and just picture their costs. I know we don't deal with the exchange rate quite as much, but their imports, which is basically fertilizer and some chemicals, those are their annual imports. When this exchange rate is higher, those imports are more expensive. Just think about, they have a weaker exchange rate, so their imports are more expensive. And then their revenue, which is their exports, where are we here? So their revenue, which is the exports, is when this is better, when this is higher, that gives them more revenue because it's exports. Not too different than the US, right? But just so we understand that. So what I wanted to point out about this, and the reason this is hurting so much. Right now, at the lowest point of their exchange rate is when they have their revenue. And this is what they're using to meet all of their Brazilian obligations, which is, their payroll, their fuel, all of the costs that are in Brazilian accountant, payroll, fuel, overhead, freight, living expenses, all of that stuff, storage costs, everything that is tied to the Brazilian currency. They are bringing in less Brazilian currency with higher obligations, and this is really hurting them on the revenue side. But most of them bought fertilizer just the way it works, right? You need your fertilizer delivered on your farm around here for planting. So logistics are tough. So before that is when you have to be paying for your fertilizer. So they bought fertilizer when that exchange rate was higher. So let's just, for the sake of an example, let's just draw this. It's at 520. I'm going to go up here to 570, although it's even higher than that, probably. It's 580. So let's just say rounded numbers, right? Their inputs that are in dollars are 15% higher. And this is just because of exchange rate, right? 15% higher. And their revenue, based on, maybe year average, are 15% lower. So it was a bad deal on both sides. And just to compound it, their interest rate, if they have interest rates in Brazilian currency, the interest rate in Brazilian currency is 15%. So let's just so you can understand why this is such a tough situation. I'll go ahead and stop sharing the screen, then we'll describe it. We all know how tight margins are with the low international price of soybeans, right? It's not hard to convince a farmer that times are tough. But let's say you take out a loan in Brazilian currency, and most years you take out a loan in Brazilian currency, the currency devalues. So when you pay that back, yes, you paid 15% interest, but maybe there was 10% depreciation in your currency or 5%, to where it's like, okay, between the inflation or exchange rate, yeah, on paper I'm paying 15%, but then I'm exporting soybeans, so I'm bringing in dollars, so it's okay. It's expensive interest at 10% or 12% or whatever the number is, but it's okay, because typically that there's inflation in Brazil and there's devaluation of the currency that somewhat help cover those costs. It's typically a cost advantage. But this year, let's just say that you took out a line of credit, which many, if not most, did, to buy fertilizer. So you get a loan at the bank, and on this loan in Brazilian currency, you're going to pay 15%, 20% interest, which is absurd. But you pay you bought your fertilizer when the exchange rate was 570, 580. So you had a more expensive fertilizer in Brazilian currency. So you have more expensive fertilizer in Brazilian currency. You're higher interest because it's in Brazilian currency. And then when it's time to sell, that exchange rate has increased in value instead of decreased in value. And that exchange rate so your cost is, between interest and the bad exchange rate, your cost might be 30 or 40% higher, and what you're selling is 10 or 15% lower. It's on tight margins. I mean, I'm trying to think of, there's very few farmers, if any, that are looking at a profitable situation down there. It's a really bad double whammy that's affecting them. So as bad as the pictures are of soybean losses the exchange rate is the nightmare of a story that they're dealing with down there. How does that impact us in the US? How does that impact Chicago? If anything, I think it's likely bullish, because what we have seen that's hanging in there a little bit is their basis. Because farmers are looking at the number in the Brazilian currency and just saying, there's no way I could sell it. For the sake of just examples, picture your break even is at $10 or $11, and then your costs went up, and so your break even went from, say, $10 to $11 or $11 to $12, and then you're looking at $7 or $8 soybeans. For a lot of these guys, their sales price would need to be $2 to $3 higher to break even. So as much as possible, like they're saying, listen, I can figure out some way to not sell my soybeans, or I can bite the bullet and take a really big loss, like in most cases, probably 20 to 30% loss without putting in depreciation and without actually figuring their costs, just on that, on the note, basically, on what they have. So it's a tough situation, and that's on the mind of a lot of them. But again, it's a challenging time in agriculture, and that we do have, in my opinion, we have a weather story out of South America, and it's too much rain. We have to keep tracking. Can they stay on pace with harvest? The soybeans will get harvested. Maybe a little bit comes off the yield. I think that's not likely going to be much of a story. If the dollar keeps going down, man, if that dollar keeps going down, that's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on them. And I do think it likely is bullish for Chicago and for prices here into the US. So as that dollar goes down, I think it will probably be a bullish story, more so as time moves on, but that's one to watch closely. And the weather situation, delayed planting on corn, there's a pretty small window for that double crop corn. And that, for example, the January report, man, you go take off some acreage and some yield off of Brazil, even without adjusting the numbers in the US, that can change global balance sheets pretty quick. We already have strong demand in the US, so don't want to get overly optimistic, but there could be a story. And if you are looking for help on your grain sales, don't hesitate to reach out and we can go over that. Have a great rest of your day, great weekend.